Sabrina 2000s comic, issue 9. The story starts with Zelda telling Sabrina the bus is here, and Salem gets worried and says that this is her last chance to back out. It seems like the trend on this comic is that Salem is always right when he gets worried about something, so is Sabrina gonna be an idiot by somehow not listening to his warning? All he says is that going to summer camp is apparently weird, and all kinds of strange things can happen. There was no foreshadowing to her wanting to go to summer camp, considering that in a previous story she said she wanted to go swimming at the beach and play volleyball. Apparently this is taking place on a different year. Zelda, a witch, asks what's so strange about summer camp. I assumed Salem was warning her that somehow strange things automatically happen to witches when going to mortal summer camps. Salem says let's start with that bus, and it turns out Sabrina's going into a white floating bus taking her to a camp in the other realm. It's pretty confusing that someone normally portrayed as either wanting to just be a normal girl to fit in, or someone discouraged from using magic entirely, is actually being allowed to go to a camp for witches. Salem complains that all kinds of supernatural kids attend camp, and Sabrina will have to endure all kinds of riffraff. He really cares about Sabrina for someone who wants to take over the world. Even for a comic where it's like that, it seems to place more emphasis on him caring about Sabrina in particular than ever. Sabrina waves goodbye, saying that she'll see them in only 2 weeks. So that makes sense. She's not giving up her entire summer to go to camp. Hilda says she'll miss her. Salem acts like he doesn't remember Sabrina's name and says her bed is available now. And hopefully Hilda's right when she says that he's just kidding around, as already she starts crying because she's growing up. He would just zap up a bed if he wanted a bed. These moments feel forced and sappy when the comic makes me mad at them so much. They're trying to make us believe they're good parents, as if we forgot about them forcing her to get a job. A weird-looking person says uh-oh when Sabrina asks the driver when he's gonna drop them at camp. I guess the outer space they're flying through only looks like that because of a witch's magical spell summoning these objects to it for the looks. I can't buy that anyone would want a floating eye in space, because that looks creepy, and even if someone did do that, it'd be zapped away by someone else. We know, it's the other realm. That doesn't mean we have to have this here. The students get dropped into Lake Erie, which borders the witch camp. Based on the way outer space looked, it's not literally the mortal world Lake Erie. An ugly girl insults Sabrina for encouraging the wackos who work for this place. Unfortunately, someone takes Sabrina's side right away, implying that the story won't be as mean to Sabrina as possible. She's got interesting earrings. The ugly girl calls her Baldy, and already says that she's gonna be the top dog around here. And she's literally called a troll. And it's fortunately lampshaded that she's already bullying people. Yeah, for this to happen already without any real provoking, already makes it hard for me to respect the story. The story just started, and already we've got a cliche bully character. And it being a girl isn't enough to make it interesting. It's still a plot that's so generic that doesn't really need to happen. We've already seen Sabrina go to a witch camp for witch girls. She's just not the counselor this time. It turns out Landra already knows Rotunda and explains that she isn't happy until everyone else isn't. She helps her stand up from the fortunately shallow part of the lake, and fortunately Sabrina thanks her. She explains that she's the daughter of a South American jungle shaman. What kind of teenage girl casually mentions the job of their father when introducing themselves to a girl? That's her father's accomplishment, not hers. It's nice of her to say she loves Sabrina's hair. I can't help but feel like it's lazy to have the girl who immediately befriends Sabrina slightly resemble Chloe. Of all the other designs she could have had, they just make her Captain Ersatz of Chloe. But it's worth it because I like Chloe. And the fact that she somehow has blue eyes helps take advantage of the fact that she's a witch. Unless she's wearing blue contact lenses and somehow putting up with seeing everything in a blue tint. I do like the blue eyes, and the fact that her father's a jungle shaman, as in a witch doctor. There's multiple different kinds of witches, which is less boring than portraying them all as either just like mortals or stereotypical witches. Sabrina politely asks her to tell her more about herself right after they just met, and she says they should wait until later to avoid missing the opening speech. They're introduced to the weird-looking camp counselors. And oh, how convenient, Sabrina and Landra are in the same cabin. I've completely stopped taking the story seriously at this point. What are the chances of this happening? Granted, coincidences happen, but still, this is so fiction-y. Sure, it's lucky for Sabrina that they can room together. What's the catch? Other than the shitty bully cliche existing. At least she's ugly, unlike Jem, so she gets a little comeuppance, while Jem can co-spy on her appearance alone. Landra says she's glad she can room with her too, and Rotunda says she's getting her gang together. Sabrina says she's here to have a good time and not bicker with her, but if she really cared about not bickering with her, she'd just ignore her and make her look like the ridiculous one. Surprisingly, the story cuts to the next scene after that instead of Rotunda punching Sabrina, like what actually happened if she's such an over-the-top bully. Landra gets rid of some really big bedbugs. And oh, what a coincidence. She says that her family's trying to raise her like a normal girl. It wouldn't be so stupid if she wasn't the only girl like that in the camp as far as we can see. She says it's interesting, as if she somehow thinks she's the only witch who has a life like this, or almost the only one who does. At this point in the comic, it'd actually be interesting if she wasn't being raised like a normal girl. And she's not really being raised like a normal girl, if she's still being sent to a witch camp. So one of the camp counselors says that the 2-week session ends with some sort of Olympics and only one cabin can win the trophy, as well as a bonus for that cabin's counselor, and she enthusiastically orders them with an angry expression to run through an obstacle course. Everything about camp just seems like a waste of time. Sabrina says she has a feeling this camp's going to be very bizarre, but I'm just thinking it's cliche. The only thing bizarre about this place so far is the way that some of the people in the camp look. I bet the gym counselor here is a cliche. Like, isn't it common for gym teachers in general to be portrayed this way? It's tiresome to see. Even if I'm sure there's some real ones like that, it still doesn't look sympathetic. Landra says to watch out for gargoyles overhead. You could just make assumptions about how the story would go up to this point, based on other camp stories, and you'd be right if you were cynical enough. We see a comedy page where Zelda says no to some tea. Hilda recognizes that sad attitude and figures out that after 80 years, she's still pining for someone who broke her heart. But it turns out she had him turned into a pine tree, and he's stuck in her backyard. She says that she hopes he's learning a lesson. Why would she think that? The only lesson he could possibly be learning is that she's a psychopath. So she really is do as I say, not as I do. This is actually worse than when Hilda in the sitcom casually revealed that she had trapped her ex-boyfriend in a ring. At least with him, he gets to see all sorts of places because she leaves the house with the ring on. Also, it wouldn't surprise me at all if this so-called joke created a continuity error. I don't remember there being a pine tree in Sabrina's backyard. Or front yard. Whichever this is. Honestly, I feel like at this point it'd actually be more merciful for her to have used the love potion on him instead of turning him into a tree, make him unable to move for 80 years. At least if he was in love with her, he would still be able to do a bunch of stuff and go all over the place. She's got twisted morals, and the Witches' Council does if they haven't punished her for this, when their constant surveillance would have caught her doing that. They would have to have constant surveillance to have caught Salem trying to take over the world. Maybe it's like certain countries in the real world where over-the-top punishment for adultery is a thing in the law, so she was allowed to turn him into a tree. This was supposed to be funny just because there's a visual pun, but I don't see how it's funny. And times like this make it look like Zelda and Hilda are two characters at once. Back to the main story. It turns out that instead of telling a ghost story, Sabrina says that the insurance salesman could be on the bully's front porch. And that makes her scream, and she points at her all of a sudden. I mean, she is pointing, so maybe she's screaming because she instinctively thinks Sabrina's warping the insurance salesman to her front door. But she's not at her front door, so why would she scream about it? The counselor tells them good job as the day ends, and Landra's nice enough to put her hand on Sabrina's shoulder and say that nobody can tell mortal stories around the campfire like her. Really? Sweet innocent Sabrina? You could tell way scarier mortal stories than that. Mortals have done horrible things. Sabrina somehow hopes she didn't scare Rotunda too much, even though she's been nasty to her for 2 whole weeks. It's already been 2 weeks? At least that's a twist. I thought she'd hate camp so much that she'd want to leave before a week was up, and that would explain why the camp story would only last 1 story. I keep wanting to call Rotunda Rotundra because tundra is a word. Rotund just means bat, and we already know she's bat. It's just explaining the joke to name her that. And both Rotunda and Rotundra are ridiculous non-names, so they both seem equally likely. Although, if her parents actually named her Rotunda, then maybe my immediate assumption that she's nasty because of horrible parents was right, because only people who hate her would call her a bat joke. She gets some comeuppance because someone points and laughs at her. One of the blonde members of her gang is wearing this giant mask that reminds me of the ancient walkers. Too bad he doesn't demonstrate a personality, because it could have been interesting. Sabrina says she's finally gonna write a letter home in the rec room. Landro says she's being silly because camp ends tomorrow and she'll be home before it arrives. I guess I'm expected to believe she was always too busy or tired to want to write a letter to her own family. She says that if she sends it I-mail, the Cyclops bus driver will deliver it by 10 a.m. So she writes a letter that shows us a montage. Why does she say her amazing green powers? There's no way that Sabrina wants to have those same powers. Witches were always omnipotent. I'm expected to believe a camp would be allowed to have sharks in its waters when people are rowing boats in them, requiring her to learn to row really fast. That camp will be shut down and sued into oblivion. What if a shark attacked before the witch would be able to defend herself? We see Rotunda get humiliated by supposed free food as Sabrina says that they've developed a Roadrunner-Coyote relationship. I'd rather the story not have this bully at all. Nothing that happens to her is enough. We see a counselor say that they're making Blair witch effigies, and they're all grown at having to do it again. There's weird creatures outside the tents that make weird noises. Landra tells Sabrina to not get all worked up over the Olympics, even though they've been training like maniacs for 2 weeks. She says she keeps forgetting that this is her rookie season, and Sabrina asks why all of the counselors are standing around yelling at each other, which happens every year. I assume there's different counselors every year since they'd get fired for this. But this happening every year would make even less sense then. Medusa accuses the Minotaur of putting a mongoose under her pillow to somehow disrupt her team. She's told that all she cares about is her bonus, and the stereotypical witch tells them to quiet down because she's in charge and she zaps them all. Landra says that camp is dismissed and it's time to go home. She says she's having her bags brought out as they hold hands for no reason, and Sabrina says that she loves to watch her use her powers. Of course, because her aunts don't want her to use magic. Landra says that the bus might not survive the Olympics, so she wants to send her home her way, through the universal root realm. They hug as Rotunda's tied by the feet by a branch, and Sabrina gets teleported to Zelda. Why does it have to be an inexplicable root realm, then? Sabrina lives on a completely different planet. So there's no way this can make sense as a justification, because the roots aren't connected to that planet. Well, I guess Sabrina showed her a photo of what her backyard looks like, so that's why she knew how to imagine it. And Hilda says that she was just about to read her letter. I want to say that Landra's more boring than Chloe because she's a witch too. And she doesn't have a personality beyond nice girl. At least Chloe is a female friend who's mortal and still knows Sabrina's a witch, which is barely done. It's unique from Sabrina that Landra lives in a rainforest home, but I can't help but wonder if people found that to be offensive because it sounds stereotypical. Well, Chloe doesn't have that problem at all. Witches can make their homes look as fancy as they like. So obviously she lives in that kind of house because her family just appreciates the aesthetic. Another reason she's a boring person is that Landra hasn't shown any kind of personality flaw. Of course, I'd want a realistic personality flaw, not one that's forced to happen. At least Chloe showed a bit of a relatable temper because she wanted to smack Harvey with a sandal and use invisibility to do what she wants. Landra's been a Mary Sue all story, but I'll gladly take that over an unlikable jerk or idiot from Sonic. And I assume we'll never see her again, despite the text box asking the audience to write if they want to see her again, because normally it's an episodic comic. It could have been explained why she conveniently got the same cabin as Sabrina. She could have brainwashed the counselors into it. At least that'd make the plot more plausible. I was kind of expecting a twist because of how convenient their instant best friendship was, but that'd be self-awareness. In the next story, Salem makes Harvey spill chocolate milk on his shirt while chasing a fly. Why didn't he just point at the fly and make it drop on the floor paralyzed? Well, he's doing this because he's a cat, and he thinks that won't be as fun. But since when do cats chase flies, though? She said she'll find a shirt he can wear home. I'd like it if she watched it just by pointing at it, and then erasing his memory. If she had a brain, she'd give him a non-girly shirt. But somehow, because bullshit, she thought he'd want the most embarrassing shirt for a guy that's not colored pink, saying "I love John Tesh" on it. I don't know who that is. Logically, she would have given him a shirt that doesn't look embarrassing. Logically, he would have immediately said he didn't want that shirt, and she'd get him a different one. She says that apparently he likes to wear them XXL, even though a shirt of that size would never fit on someone so skinny. So he'd never have such a ridiculous habit in the first place. So she got him one of her aunt's night shirts, even though her aunts are all skinny. And this shirt doesn't look super huge. This might be the most fundamentally forced joke I've ever seen in my life. Compare this to Rick and Morty, where I compliment the jokes for what makes them good. Why didn't Sabrina zap up a shirt he'd like? He hopes no one will see him in the shirt, but the scene cuts away instead of cruelly showing someone see him and laugh at him, which avoids even more unnecessary mean humor. But if this is the type of humor it's going for by making him wear that shirt, then it's lame to not show someone see him in it at that point. It turns out Sabrina's forcing Salem to wash Harvey's shirt the old-fashioned way. I didn't expect this, but it does make sense because he should be punished for staining his shirt. This would be so much easier for Harvey if she would just clean the shirt with magic instantly. She tells him to hang it out to dry and she'll never speak of it again. That's merciful as she keeps her word. He complains about it being dark out and says that he could use a little light, and then out of nowhere a spotlight shines on him and he complains about too much light. Logically, he would have instantly used magic to get rid of that light because he has magic. But instead, an alien in a spaceship says that his signal has been received, and he thinks the shirt with a picture of a stereotypical alien head on it is that signal. At this point, it's more interesting to see aliens in Sabrina than witches. It sure is convenient that he can speak English. I remember this happening. This is memorable, but it's not memorable that this was led up to by the story before this. Then the logic completely goes out the window because I'm expected to believe that shirt is a flag that officially surrenders the planet to the Razorian Empire. It's clearly a shirt, not a flag. Somehow all Salem does in this panel is look back and forth and stammer, when what a witch would actually do is instantly kill him, or turn him into a frog. The alien plans on enslaving the native population. Salem somehow thinks that merely talking to him is a good idea. He tried to take over the world. He's not above using force and magic to get what he wants. At least punch him. The alien presses a button on his spaceship, threatening Salem with a laser that looks bigger than the ship itself. But fortunately, unlike I was expecting at this point, Salem stays brave and uses magic to shrink the ship. Then he puts him in the ship and chases him like a bug. An awesome callback to the start of the story. It's still too late. I'm still in a bad mood because it took too long to do this. He tells Salem to have mercy, and somehow he actually agrees and returns him to full size. Oh yeah, just let him leave the planet when he threatened to enslave it. It was satisfying to see him bow and say he's not worthy. He tells him to go back home and forget he ever saw this place, or else next time he'll suffer. He says that there'll be no next time, and his word is law. That's smarter than actually killing him or freezing him, because people from his planet would try to pick him up, and it'd get invaded as revenge. Instead, Salem made him a messenger to tell his planet to stay far away from Earth because of witches. Salem says satisfyingly, nothing like saving the world before going to bed. I guess that makes up for trying to take over the world. I bet no one will ever believe him, and the story will end with Sabrina either being too mean to him, or not even knowing about this, considering how mean the comic is to Salem. I figured Salem would be forced to deal with other members of his species if it was taking so long to use his magic. So the story was a lot more awesome than I expected it to be. We've seen aliens before who know that witches exist, so while this comes out of nowhere in the story itself, it's not forced. Okay, at least the story ends with Sabrina thanking Salem for getting Harvey's shirt cleaned and apologizing for being so hard on him. It seems totally forced that she calls him a space case. I've never heard anyone say that. It's just there for a pun based on the alien earlier, but you didn't know about him. A really good ending would have Salem get thanked for saving the world and thrown a party. The next story is called Sand Dollars. Don't remind me of that crappy ending of the Archie Sonic reboot. Harvey tells Sabrina about a sandcastle contest that's perfect for her because she's been building terrific sandcastles all summer. For once I'd be impressed if she did something without magic, because if she was only building terrific sandcastles by using magic, it'd be too easy for her. Out of nowhere, Jem shows up, and someone driving a ridiculous-looking blue vehicle for her destroys Sabrina's sandcastle, saying that she's gonna win the contest. So this is gonna be one of those stories. I wish it was explained that he's only doing this outlandish, dickish thing because she's gonna pay him for it, but I guess we're supposed to just assume that. Sabrina says that she can't bring that monstrosity to the beach, and Jem says that when you're wealthy, anything's possible. It still feels too cartoonishly stupid for my liking. It's like Refuge and Audacity. She can do literally anything. Her parents vacationed in Guam without her in the show, so why is she allowed to spend their money on anything she wants if they don't even like her? And why did she expect them to bail her out of any legal consequences? Why does it have to be Jem competing with Sabrina? I was expecting new characters. She says that she's hired top scientists, lawyers, media consultants, and a local expert to properly prepare her for a victory tomorrow. And Sabrina's space in the beach is reserved for her now. A lot of rich people are known for being stingy with their money. I guess her parents aren't, if she keeps spending money so frivolously with no indication of her getting punished for it. If she did get punished for it, she probably wouldn't keep doing it. We're supposed to assume she never spends too much money. It's like her parents have bottomless pockets. Sabrina tells her that winning isn't everything. Jem tells Watkins to get her to the hairdresser so she'll look good. I already assumed she cared about her appearance, but at least it shows up once as a trait other than asshole. I already assumed she cares about her appearance. Out of nowhere, Sabrina reveals that evening that Harvey's so mad at Jem he's not going tomorrow. It's a good thing Harvey's actually getting mad at Jem for doing something wrong. I liked that it was relatable this time. Hilda tells Sabrina not to let Jem get to her. The Hilda I know would encourage her to get revenge. What is the point of this character? Instead, only Salem does that, encouraging her to turn her into a clan. She could do that and erase her memory of that. Even then it'd be pointless because it wouldn't make her a nice person and teach her a lesson. But at least it'd be satisfying to see for the audience. But no, Hilda says that they're raising Sabrina as a normal mortal child. Yeah, then why did you teach her about magic anyways? Zelda has just as small of a brain as her by saying that Salem's allowed to go with Sabrina tomorrow, and somehow expecting him not to use magic. If he didn't, that'd make for a very boring story. Sadly, this is dragged out because Salem asks sarcastically if they want him to sign an affidavit, and Zelda zaps up one for him to sign. Sabrina just stands there smiling instead of being a remotely relatable protagonist and pointing that hypocrisy out. This is such a waste of time because he's clearly not going to hold true to it. She says they should start planning their sandcastle already. At least that was smart of her. She sees a world-famous painter and sculptor hired by Jem to do most of the work for a sandcastle. Logically, he would be given the credit, and Jem would be told to get lost. I guess the only reason she'll be satisfied with a victory if she's doing none of the work is that Sabrina won't get to win. But I don't understand why she doesn't want Sabrina to win. I assume she'll have to bribe the judge just to not disqualify her. But then the victory really will be meaningless because she cheated, and could have just bribed the judge to skip the competition entirely. Instead of pointing any of this out, Sabrina just asked her if she's considered therapy. But she won't have a reason to do that if that's all she said. Sabrina, immediately recognizing the sculptor somehow, already knows that he only uses clay to sculpt, and that's why it's being trucked in, with a truck that says Quigley's Trucking. Can you immediately bring to mind the appearance of a world-famous sculptor and painter? She'd only be familiar with TV and movie stars. Just as I'm thinking that there's no logical reason Jem would be allowed to use clay instead of sand for a sandcastle, Jem says that her experts say that clay is sand. I'd love if the writer grew a brain and she did get disqualified, and instantly. It would be satisfying if she lost because of all this foreshadowing that she's just cheating. If this was an entertaining story, we'd see Sabrina cast a spell on the sculptor so that he'd be guaranteed to do a terrible job, which would be okay because she's cheating too, so she shouldn't win. Sabrina says that if Jem wants to waste her time and money, that's her business, and they should be calm about it, even though Jem is supposed to be her mortal enemy. She's not being a good protagonist if she doesn't even give a shit. 70s Sabrina was more like this Salem and this Sabrina combined, and that makes her look like more of a realistic, believable character. Here it's just black and white morality. Salem's reminded that he signed a legal document that he can't enchant one grain of sand. It turns out that it being specific for no logical reason at all was Chekhov's gun because he uses magic to create a tsunami, destroying both sandcastles, including Sabrina's even though she's a witch. Why didn't it write it so that Sabrina would win? It would have actually been a better ending if Jem got told right away by a judge that she's not in the competition because she's not making the castle. And we could see her do a horrible job making a sand castle herself and Sabrina would win. If this is trying to be more of a kid's comic, it'd be common sense to have a moral of the story that cheaters never prosper because they're cheating, not because one of their contestants happened to have a cheating magical cat. What if a rich teenager read this and totally believed Jem that she could do anything? I'm glad Salem's only punishment was getting washed away in the water with Sabrina and Hilda didn't hound him for it. But what's the point of Sabrina being a witch if she's not going to use her magic in this story? What's the point of having Salem be the one using the magic instead of her? This issue is by Mike Gallagher. The first story, don't let the appearances of the characters fool you because it's nothing but a collection of cliches. So predictable and overused that I assumed the writer would find them too boring to use. As Sabrina goes to camp and it goes exactly as you'd expect. It was so convenient that she immediately met a witch like Chloe and became best friends and got the same cabin as her that I was suspicious and was hoping for a twist that explained how fictiony the whole thing felt. But nope. And of course there was a bully character who only insisted to be mean and get humiliated, but not nearly enough to make up for being in the story. The second story has Salem spilled chocolate milk on Harvey's shirt and then saved the world from an alien invasion by scaring the alien by shrinking him in his spaceship. Well, good for him, but it made no sense that the alien thought Earth was surrendering. And I was furious with Salem for taking more than 1 second to use magic on him. An earlier Sabrina comic had Sabrina's entire immediate family scare some aliens away. So there was variety in what was happening instead of just one measly spell being used. And it was interesting because they didn't scare the aliens away on purpose. The final story is about Jem wanting to cheat at a sandcastle competition by getting a famous sculptor to make a sandcastle out of clay. And instead of her immediately being disqualified because reality ensues and the moral of the story is that cheaters never prosper, we're expected to believe Jem's allowed to do anything because she's rich, which is such a responsible message for any rich brats in the audience. So Salem finally makes a tsunami destroy her castle, but it has to destroy Sabrina's castle too. It was his spell. He wanted to imagine her castle being destroyed too. Obviously, Sabrina should have been the one casting the spell. And there was blatant padding in the story because we could have just had the story start out when the competition was starting.